The observation deck of the Galactic Council's flagship trembled as another explosion lit up the void. Commander Zoix Theta adjusted his 4 optical sensors, trying to process what he was witnessing. In his 300 cycles of military service across 47 different species conflicts, he had never seen anything like this. The humans were charging, in space, against all logic, against all established military doctrine that had governed civilized warfare for millennia. They were charging. Impossible, muttered Subcommander Keelash beside him, her blue scales flickering with disbelief. No species would risk such casualties. The defensive positions are too strong. But the humans didn't seem to care about the defensive positions, or the casualties, or the fact that what they were doing went against every simulation, every tactical manual, every piece of wisdom the Galactic Council had accumulated over 10,000 years. ZYX Theta had been assigned as a neutral observer when the Dominion had attacked the human colony of New Singapore. The Dominion forces had followed standard protocol: establish orbital supremacy, deploy shield generators, create an impenetrable defensive line, and wait for surrender. It was how wars were fought. It was civilized. It minimized casualties on both sides. The humans, apparently, had not received that memo. Sir, Communications Officer Prill's tentacles quivered with anxiety. I'm intercepting human battle communications. They're singing, sir. Singing? ZYX Theta's mandibles clicked in confusion. Decode it. What are they saying? The universal translator struggled for a moment before the words filled the observation deck. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. The human fleet, if it could even be called that, was a mismatched collection of military vessels, converted cargo haulers, mining ships, and even pleasure yachts. They had welded armor plating to civilian vessels, strapped weapons to anything that could fly, and painted them all with the same defiant message: remember New Singapore. The Dominion's perfect formation, with its synchronized shield arrays and coordinated firing solutions, should have obliterated them in seconds. Should have. But the humans did something the tactical computers couldn't predict. They accelerated. All of them. Every single ship pushed their engines beyond safe limits, beyond manufacturer specifications, beyond sanity. The smaller ships actually began to glow from the heat of their overdriven reactors. They'll burn out their engines. Keelash exclaimed. It's suicide. No, Alex Theta said slowly, watching the tactical display with growing unease. It's something else. The human ships weren't just accelerating randomly. There was a pattern to their madness. The larger vessels formed a spearhead, while the smaller ships wove between them in a complex dance. Cargo haulers dumped their loads. Not supplies, but clouds of metallic chaff and sensor-disrupting particles. Mining vessels fired their industrial lasers not at enemy ships, but at debris, creating clouds of superheated gas that confused targeting systems. The Dominion's automated defense systems, programmed for conventional warfare, struggled to adapt. They were designed to counter organized formations using predictable tactics. They were not designed for this chaos. A human destroyer, an old model that should have been decommissioned decades ago, took a direct hit from a Dominion plasma cannon. Its shields collapsed, armor plating vaporized, and a third of the ship simply ceased to exist. The tactical computer marked it as destroyed. The tactical computer was wrong. The burning destroyer didn't retreat. It didn't even slow down. Instead, it accelerated harder, its remaining engines screaming in protest. Through the observation deck's magnification, ZYX Theta could see human crew members in emergency suits, manually firing weapons from hull breaches, their ship literally falling apart around them. Madness, Keelash whispered. Pure madness. But there was method to their madness. The dying destroyer's sacrifice created a gap in the Dominion's firing pattern. 3 human corvettes darted through, unleashing torpedoes at point-blank range before the defense systems could react. The Dominion's shield generator, a billion-credit piece of technology, vanished in nuclear fire. The perfectly synchronized Dominion formation wavered for the first time in recorded history. And the humans pressed harder. A converted cargo hauler, its hull covered in improvised armor made from what looked like salvaged deck plating, rammed into a Dominion frigate. Both ships crumpled together, but the human vessel had one last surprise. Its cargo bay doors blew open, revealing not empty space, but a full squadron of single-seat fighters that had been hiding inside. Ow! Prill's voice was barely a whisper. The radiation levels in that bay must have been lethal. Those pilots were already dying. HFY Theta finished. They knew it was a one-way trip. The fighters swarmed the Dominion frigate like angry insects, too small and fast for the capital ship weapons to track. They targeted weak points with surgical precision, sensor arrays, communication nodes, maneuvering thrusters. Death by 1,000 cuts. The Galactic Council had always wondered why humans had never been invited to join, despite achieving faster-than-light travel. They were considered too unpredictable, too emotional, too primitive. The Council preferred species that had evolved beyond the need for physical conflict, species that settled disputes through negotiation and calculated warfare. Watching the humans fight, HFY Theta began to understand why they had been excluded, and why that might have been a terrible mistake. The human flagship, a battered dreadnought that had seen better days, broadcast on all frequencies. The universal translator rendered the commander's words in the flat, emotionless tone it used for all species. But somehow, HFY Theta could feel the fury behind them. Dominion forces, this is Admiral Chun of the United Earth Defense Force. You burned our colony. You killed 40,000 civilians. Men, women, children. You called us weak. You called us prey. A pause. We are humanity. We are the descendants of those who faced saber-toothed tigers with pointed sticks. We are the children of those who crossed frozen oceans in wooden boats. We are the legacy of every human who ever stood up to a bully and said no more. You want to see weak? Look in your mirrors as you run. The Dominion commander responded with standard threats, promises of annihilation, reminders of their technological superiority. But his words sounded hollow now, because despite all their advantages, despite all their preparation, despite following every rule of civilized warfare, they were losing. The humans had turned space itself into their ally. Every piece of debris became potential cover. Every destroyed ship became a navigation hazard. Every act of desperation became a tactical advantage. They fought not like a military force, but like cornered animals, vicious, unpredictable, and absolutely unwilling to surrender. Sir, Keelash's voice trembled. The Dominion flagship is retreating. It was true. The pride of the Dominion fleet, a supercarrier that had never known defeat, was pulling back. Its escorts followed, their formation now ragged and defensive. They had lost a third of their forces to an enemy they outnumbered and outgunned by every metric. But the humans didn't let them retreat peacefully. They pursued, harried, attacked from angles that shouldn't have been possible. A human pilot actually flew his damaged fighter inside the launch bay of a Dominion carrier, ejecting at the last second before his fusion reactor overloaded. The explosion crippled the carrier's ability to deploy its own fighters. They don't stop, Prill observed, his voice filled with something between awe and terror. Even when they win, they don't stop. No, HFY Theta agreed. They don't. He thought about the colony of New Singapore. 40,000 dead civilians. In the grand calculus of galactic warfare, it was a small number. The Dominion had killed far more in other conflicts. But those other species had negotiated, had surrendered, had accepted their losses as the price of peace. Humans, apparently, calculated differently. As the Dominion fleet jumped to faster-than-light travel, fleeing the battlefield they had been so certain they would dominate, the human ships finally began to slow. The singing continued, but now it was mixed with other sounds, crying for the dead, cheering for the living, and something else, laughter. They were laughing. They're insane, Keelash said flatly. Completely, utterly insane. Perhaps, HFY Theta mused. Or perhaps we've been sane for so long we've forgotten what it means to truly fight for something. The human admiral's voice came over the communications again, this time directed at the Galactic Council observers. Council ships, this is Admiral Chun. I hope you got a good look. Spread the word to anyone else thinking about attacking human colonies. We don't fight by your rules. We don't surrender. We don't forgive. And we absolutely never forget. As the human fleet began collecting their dead and damaged, HFY Theta noticed something that made his respiratory system stutter. The humans weren't just retrieving their own people. They were also collecting Dominion escape pods, treating enemy wounded, following the ancient human codes of conduct that seemed so at odds with the savagery they had just displayed. Sir, Prill ventured, how do we report this? The council won't believe, they won't understand. HFY Theta was quiet for a long moment, watching the humans work. They had lost nearly half their fleet. Thousands were dead. By any reasonable measure, it had been a Pyrrhic victory at best. But they acted as if they had won the greatest victory in their history. And perhaps they had, because the message was clear. Attacking humanity came with a price that civilized species weren't willing to pay. We report the truth, HFY Theta said finally. That humanity doesn't fight wars. They survive them. And they make sure their enemies don't want to try again. As their observation ship powered up to leave, HFY Theta took one last look at the battlefield. The humans were already beginning repairs, salvaging what they could, preparing for whatever came next. They had charged into hell itself, and emerged victorious through sheer, stubborn refusal to accept defeat. For the first time in his long career, HFY Theta felt something he had never experienced while observing a battle: fear. Not of human weapons or tactics, but of the human spirit itself. That burning, indomitable will that turned farmers into soldiers, cargo ships into warships, and certain defeat into impossible victory. The cosmos had always feared the unknown, the darkness between stars, the ancient threats that might lurk in the void. But perhaps they had been looking in the wrong direction. Perhaps the real threat had been living right beside them all along on a small blue world, just waiting for someone to make the mistake of waking the sleeping giant. As the observation ship jumped to hyperspace, HFY Theta began composing his report. He had to make the council understand. Humanity wasn't just another spacefaring species. They were something far more dangerous. They were survivors, and they would do whatever it took to ensure they continued surviving. The cosmos had every right to fear them. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so quiet. 300 different species, each with their own methods of vocalization, sat in absolute silence as Commander Vex Theta's holographic recording played for the fourth time. The Battle of New Singapore, captured in crystal-clear detail, showed humanity's desperate charge against impossible odds. Counselor Vex Tan of the Ethereal Collective was the first to speak, her gaseous form pulsing with agitation. This is barbarism. No civilized species fights like this. The casualty ratios alone. 52% losses, confirmed the Logician Prime, its crystalline structure resonating with disapproval. Any rational species would have surrendered after 10% casualties. The humans continued attacking even while actively dying. This defies all cost-benefit analysis. HFY Theta stood at the center of the chamber, feeling the weight of 300 civilizations' attention. He had been recalled from his observation post to provide first-hand testimony. What he had to say would shape galactic policy toward humanity for generations. Honored counselors, he began, his mandibles clicking nervously. What you've seen is not an aberration. In the past 6 months since New Singapore, I've observed 17 different human military engagements. Each one displayed the same characteristics. He activated his personal display, showing a star map dotted with conflict zones. The hegemony tested human defenses at Proxima Station. The humans strapped engines to asteroids and rode them into battle. The Synthetic Alliance attempted to blockade the Mars shipyards. Human workers welded themselves into mining mechs and attacked warships designed to fight entire fleets. Every single engagement ended the same way, with the aggressors retreating and vowing never to provoke humanity again. Surely they must have some weakness, interjected Counselor Mector, his 6 arms gesturing frantically. Every species has logical limitations, resource constraints, supply line vulnerabilities, psychological breaking points. They do have weaknesses, ZYX Theta admitted. Their technology is decades behind ours. Their ships are slower, their weapons less efficient, their shields barely functional by our standards. But they compensate with something we cannot quantify, an absolute refusal to acknowledge when they should lose. He pulled up another recording, this one from a smaller skirmish near the asteroid belt. Observe. A single human patrol craft, outnumbered 12-1 by pirate vessels. Any rational commander would surrender or flee. The human ship instead broadcast one message: remember the Alamo. Then they overloaded their reactor and flew directly into the pirate formation. The explosion destroyed 3 pirate vessels and damaged 6 others. The survivors fled. But why? The question came from Counselor Yilnell, whose species had evolved beyond violence so long ago they could barely comprehend it. What biological imperative drives them to such extremes? I've been studying their history, ZYX Theta said, calling up images from Earth's past. They evolved on a death world. Not just any death world, one where everything from the weather to the wildlife seemed designed to kill them. They survived ice ages, supervolcanic eruptions, plagues that killed half their population. Every generation of humans for 200,000 years faced extinction and refused to accept it. The images cycled through human history. Cave paintings of hunts against massive predators, ancient battles where outnumbered forces held passes against empires, explorers crossing deadly oceans in primitive vessels, scientists deliberately infecting themselves to test vaccines. They've encoded survival into their very DNA, ZYX Theta continued. But more than that, they've turned it into something approaching religion. They tell stories of their defeats that sound like victories. A place called Thermopylae, where 300 warriors held off hundreds of thousands. A city called Stalingrad, where they fought over individual buildings for months rather than surrender. A space station called Liberty Point, where 4 humans held off a pirate fleet for 3 days, broadcasting defiance until their life support failed. Counselor Zephaniah D., whose species prided themselves on logic, floated forward. You speak as if you admire them, Commander. I fear them, ZYX Theta corrected. But, yes, there is something compelling about their approach. We've spent millennia civilizing warfare, making it clean, predictable, manageable. The humans remind us what war originally was: desperate, brutal, and absolute. Then, we should quarantine them, Counselor Vextan declared. Exclude them from Council space entirely. Let them burn themselves out with their primitive violence. With respect, Counselor, that would be a mistake. ZYX Theta activated another display. The humans are expanding faster than any species in recorded history. Not through conquest, but through colonization. They take worlds we consider worthless, high-gravity planets, radiation-soaked moons, asteroids barely held together by their own mass. They terraform them through sheer, stubborn effort. In 50 years, they've established more colonies than some species manage in 500. And each colony, he added meaningfully, fights like New Singapore when threatened. The chamber erupted in discussion. Some counselors called for preemptive strikes, others for diplomatic isolation. The debate raged for hours, with each species applying their own logic to the human problem. But they all missed the point ZYX Theta was trying to make. Finally, the council pre-march called for order. The ancient being, old enough to remember when half the current council species were still planet-bound, fixed its dozen eyes on ZYX Theta. Commander, the Primarch's voice resonated through the chamber. You've observed them closely. What do you recommend? ZYX Theta had been dreading this question. His answer would influence the fate of 2 civilizations, humanity and possibly the Council itself. I recommend we invite them to join the Council, he said. The chamber exploded again, this time in outrage. Invite the barbarians? Give them access to Council technology? It was unthinkable. ZYX Theta waited for the noise to die down. Consider the alternative. We leave them outside our influence, developing their own alliances, their own technology, nursing their grievances against those who see them as primitives. How long before they decide the Council itself is a threat? They couldn't possibly threaten the combined might of 300 civilizations, Counselor McTor scoffed. No, ZYX Theta agreed. But they could make the cost so high that victory would be meaningless. I've run the simulations. A war against humanity would require the complete mobilization of at least 40 Council species. Casualties would number in the billions. Infrastructure damage would set back entire sectors by decades. And that assumes they fight conventionally, which they won't. He brought up his final piece of evidence: intelligence reports from human space. They're already preparing. Every human colony has mandatory military service. They're building ships in hidden shipyards, developing weapons based on captured technology, training their entire population for war. They call insurance. They're not planning to attack anyone, but they're making sure that anyone who attacks them will regret it for generations. And if we invite them? The pre-march asked. What's to stop them from corrupting the Council's peaceful nature? Perhaps, the Wax Theta said carefully, that's exactly what we need. The Council has grown complacent. We've forgotten that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the active choice not to engage in it. The humans understand this. They prepare for war precisely so they can avoid it. Peace through strength, they call it. Look at what happened after New Singapore. The Dominion didn't just retreat. They signed a comprehensive peace treaty with humanity. They're now trading partners. The humans didn't hold grudges once the fighting stopped. They even shared medical technology to help treat the wounded they had created. They fight like demons, but they build peace like architects. Counselor Yilnell floated forward again. You're asking us to let a volatile element into our carefully balanced system. I'm asking you to recognize that they're already in the system, ZYX Theta countered. The question is whether we want them as members or as neighbors. As members, we can influence them, moderate their impulses, channel their energy constructively. As outsiders, they'll develop independently, and we'll have no say in how they grow. And there's another factor, he added, accessing classified Council intelligence. The Deep Rim probes have detected signs of something moving in the dark between galaxies. Something big. The ancient archives speak of threats that caused entire civilizations to flee our galaxy. If those threats return, do we want humanity inside our defenses or outside them? That changed the conversation. The specter of external threats had always haunted the Council. The idea of facing such threats without humanity's desperate ingenuity, or worse, with humanity as a potential second enemy, was sobering. The debate continued for days. ZYX Theta testified multiple times, showing recordings, sharing his analysis, trying to make 300 different species understand what he had learned. Humanity wasn't just another spacefaring race. They were a force of nature, shaped by a hostile universe into the ultimate survivors. The question wasn't whether they would shape the galaxy's future, but how. Finally, the vote was called. It was closer than anyone had predicted, 186 in favor, 114 against. The bare minimum needed to extend an invitation. As ZYX Theta prepared to carry the invitation to Earth, Counselor Vextan approached him privately. You've doomed us all, Commander. These humans will destroy everything we've built. Perhaps, ZYX Theta admitted. Or perhaps they'll save us from something worse. Either way, I'd rather have them with us than against us. 3 weeks later, ZYX Theta stood in the United Nations General Assembly on Earth, delivering the Council's invitation. The human delegates listened politely, asked careful questions, and then requested time to deliberate. They didn't leap at the chance to join the galaxy's most powerful alliance. They considered it, weighed it, debated it with the same intensity they brought to battle. When they finally accepted, it came with conditions. They would maintain their own defense forces. They would not be bound by Council military restrictions they considered unrealistic. They would share technology, but retain the right to develop their own innovations. They were joining as partners, not subordinates. The Council agreed, having little choice. And so humanity entered the galactic stage not as conquerors or supplicants, but as themselves, unpredictable, indomitable, and absolutely committed to their own survival. As ZYX Theta watched the human ambassador sign the treaty, he noticed something that made him understand these creatures even better. The pen the ambassador used was an antique, a family heirloom carried by his ancestor during something called World War II. Every human in the room could probably tell you its history, its significance, what battle it had survived. They carried their past with them always, not as a burden, but as armor. Every victory, every defeat, every desperate last stand was part of their collective identity. They were not just the species that had charged at New Singapore. They were the species that had always charged, from the first human who faced down a predator with nothing but courage and a sharp stick. The cosmos was right to fear them. But perhaps ZYX Theta thought, as he watched humans and aliens mingling at the reception afterward, sharing drinks and stories and finding common ground, perhaps that fear could be transformed into something else. Respect, alliance, even friendship. Because if the ancient threats did return, if darkness came calling from the void between galaxies, the Council would need humanity's special brand of madness. They would need a species that looked at impossible odds and saw a challenge. A species that could turn cargo haulers into warships and colonists into soldiers. A species that would charge into hell itself rather than let the darkness win. The cosmos feared humanity. But ZYX Theta suspected that soon the cosmos would be grateful for them. 10 years had passed since humanity joined the Galactic Council. ZYX Theta, now promoted to Fleet Admiral, stood on the bridge of the Combined Forces flagship, watching the impossible unfold. The ancient threat had returned. The Devourers, they were called in the oldest archives. Beings from the dark space between galaxies that consumed entire civilizations, leaving only empty worlds and dead stars in their wake. The Council's greatest fear had materialized, and their response had been exactly as predicted: panic, retreat, and calls for evacuation to distant galaxies. 300 species, with all their accumulated wisdom and technology, had taken one look at the advancing Devourer fleet and declared the war unwinnable. All except the humans. Admiral ZYX Theta, Captain Sarah Chun said, daughter of the legendary Admiral Chun from New Singapore. The Council retreat ships are away. We're the only ones left in this sector. She said it calmly, as if discussing the weather. Behind her, the human command crew worked with the same steady efficiency, preparing for a battle that every tactical projection said they couldn't win. Captain ZYX Theta clicked his mandibles nervously. The Council's analysis is clear. The Devourers outnumber us 1,000 to 1. Their technology is beyond our understanding. Even humanity can't. Can't what? Chun interrupted, a smile playing at her lips. Can't win? Admiral, have you learned nothing about us in 10 years? Through the view screen, the Devourer fleet stretched to infinity, biomechanical horrors the size of moons, each one capable of stripping a planet bare in days. They moved with predatory purpose, having already consumed 12 outer colonies. Nothing had even slowed them down. Council tactical doctrine suggests, ZYX Theta began. Screw Council doctrine, Chun said bluntly. We didn't beat the Dominion by following rules. We won't beat these things by running away. She turned to her crew. Signal all human ships. Execute Operation Thermopylae Rising. ZYX Theta's translator struggled with the reference before his cultural database provided context. Another human last stand. Another impossible battle they had turned into legend. Across the sector, human ships began moving. Not the massive dreadnoughts and carriers the Council favored, but everything humanity could fly. Colony ships, mining vessels, privately owned traders, even museum pieces that should have been decommissioned decades ago. They had all answered the call. Sir, his sensor officer reported, I'm reading 3 million human vessels entering the sector. But that's their entire fleet. Military and civilian. They're bringing everything. Not just ships. Chin corrected, monitoring her own displays. Look closer. The tactical display zoomed in, and ZYX Theta's respiratory system seized. The humans weren't just bringing ships. They had strapped engines to asteroids, turning them into kinetic weapons. They had converted space stations into mobile gun platforms. They had even weaponized their garbage scows, filling them with nuclear waste and turning them into dirty bombs. "You're insane," HFY Theta breathed. "This isn't warfare, it's survival," Chen finished. "The Devourers want to eat our worlds? Fine. We'll give them the worst case of indigestion in galactic history." The first wave of human ships reached the Devourer fleet. The biomechanical monsters opened their maws, deploying clouds of smaller organisms designed to strip vessels of all organic and technological components. Standard shields were useless against them. But the humans hadn't brought standard shields. The lead human vessels detonated in sequence, not from enemy fire but by design. They had turned their own ships into bombs, creating a wall of nuclear fire that vaporized the first wave of devourer organisms. Through the gaps, smaller human ships darted forward, targeting what looked like sensory organs on the massive creatures. "They're using themselves as ammunition," the Theta said, watching in horrified awe as ship after ship made suicide runs. "How can they? Because everyone on those ships volunteered," Chen said quietly. "They have families on the colonies behind us. They're not fighting for abstract concepts like galactic civilization. They're fighting for their children, their loved ones, their homes." Watch. The human fleet's true strategy became apparent. They weren't trying to destroy the Devourers. That was impossible with conventional weapons. Instead, they were hurting them, using sacrificial attacks to channel the massive creatures into predictable paths. "Engineering," Chun commanded. "Is the gift ready?" "Aye, Captain. The stellar converter is armed and ready. Though I still say this is the craziest thing we've ever done." "Noted, Lieutenant. Signal the colony ships to begin evacuation of the Kepler system." ZY Theta's mind reeled. "You're evacuating Kepler? But that's your second most populated." His words died as understanding dawned. "No, you can't be serious." "Dead serious," Chen confirmed. "We're giving the Devourers exactly what they want. A feast. 7 inhabited worlds, all in one system. Too tempting to resist." The Kepler system had 20 billion human colonists. The evacuation ships could maybe save half of them. The humans were sacrificing 10 billion of their own people as bait. The Council would never approve. "The Council ran away," Chen said harshly. "They're probably halfway to Andromeda by now. We don't have the luxury of their moral hand-wringing. We have enemies to kill." The Devourers took the bait. The biomechanical fleet, drawn by the concentration of life in the Kepler system, began converging on it. The human ships harried them every step of the way, losing thousands of vessels, but never stopping their attacks. They targeted propulsion systems, sensory clusters, anything that might slow the creatures down. As the Devourers entered the Kepler system, beginning to feed on the abandoned worlds, Chun gave the order that would echo through galactic history. "All ships, this is Admiral Chun. Our ancestors had a saying, 'Remember Pearl Harbor.' Well, after today, the galaxy will remember Kepler. Detonate the star." The stellar converter, a device the humans had developed in secret using capture Dominion technology and their own nuclear expertise, activated. The Kepler sun, artificially aged 10 billion years in 10 seconds, went nova. The explosion was visible from 3 systems away. The Devourers, caught feeding on the inner planets, had no time to escape. The creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for eons were vaporized in stellar fire, along with every human ship that had stayed behind to ensure they remained in the trap. The silence on the bridge was deafening. They had won. The ancient threat that had driven entire civilizations to flee the galaxy had been destroyed. But the cost. "Casualty report," Chun ordered, her voice steady despite the tears running down her face. 15 billion confirmed dead, came the response. 5 billion evacuated civilians who didn't make it out in time. 10 billion military and volunteer personnel. The entire Kepler system is gone. A third of humanity's total population, gone in an instant. By any measure, it was a catastrophe, a loss that would have broken any other species. But the humans weren't any other species. Signal all remaining ships, Chun commanded. Set course for the Vega colony. We have wounded to tend and families to notify. And then she paused, steel entering her voice. We rebuild. Every lost colony, every fallen ship, every single life. We rebuild it all, and we make sure nothing like this ever threatens us again. ZYX Theta watched the human fleet, what remained of it, begin the long journey home. They had lost more in one day than most species lost in their entire history. Their second-largest colony system was now an expanding cloud of stellar debris. By every logical measure, they should have been broken. Instead, they were already planning their recovery. Colony ships were being converted back from warships. Mining vessels were calculating resource requirements for new settlements. The humans had looked extinction in the face and chosen to spit in its eye, even at unimaginable cost. Ow! ZYX Theta asked Chun. How can your species endure such losses and keep going? Chun looked at him with eyes that held the weight of 15 billion deaths and the determination of the survivors. Because that's what we do, Admiral. We endure. We survive. And we make sure our children never have to face the same threat. The Devourers are gone, she continued. But there might be others out there. Other threats, other challenges. And when they come, humanity will be ready. We'll have better ships, better weapons, better defenses. And most importantly, we'll have the memory of those who died to give us this chance. She pulled up a display showing human space. Already, emergency signals were being answered. Ships were converging on refugee centers. Other species, shamed by their own retreat, were offering aid. The rebuilding had begun before the flames of Kepler had even cooled. The Council was wrong about us, Chin said softly. We're not barbarians. We're not warmongers. We're survivors. And we'll do whatever it takes to ensure our species continues. Whatever it takes. Over the next months, ZYX Theta watched humanity's response to their victory. They mourned their dead with a grief that seemed bottomless. They built monuments on every world, listing every name. Children learned the story of Kepler in schools, understanding that their freedom came at an unimaginable price. But they also celebrated life with an intensity that amazed him. They had children at rates that defied economic projections. They built new colonies on worlds even more marginal than before, as if daring the universe to try again. They shared their stellar converter technology with the Council, not as conquerors, but as protectors, asking only that it be used to defend against external threats. The Council, humbled by their own cowardice and humanity's sacrifice, welcomed them not just as members, but as leaders of the Military Defense Committee. No one argued. They had earned that right in blood and fire and impossible courage. A year after Kepler, ZYX Theta attended the memorial service on Earth. 15 billion names were read aloud, a process that took weeks. Humans came from across the galaxy to listen, to remember, to promise that the sacrifice would not be forgotten. At the end, President Martinez spoke to the assembled crowds and the watching galaxy. They say the cosmos fears us. They're right too. We are humanity. We are the species that turned our own sun into a weapon to save others. We are the ones who charge into darkness so our children can live in light. We are the survivors of Earth, and we will never, ever yield. To those who would threaten us, know this: we will sacrifice anything, endure anything, destroy anything to ensure our survival. We will turn stars into weapons and ourselves into shields. We will make the cosmos itself our ally if needed, because we are humans, and we will not go quietly into that good night. The crowd erupted in defiant cheers, and ZYX Theta felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. Not from fear this time, but from understanding. The cosmos had feared humanity because they sensed what these creatures were capable of. Not just violence, not just sacrifice, but an absolute, unwavering commitment to survival that transcended logic, transcended cost-benefit analysis, transcended everything the civilized galaxy thought it knew about warfare. As he watched humans of 100 colonies raise their voices in unison, promising to remember Kepler and stand ready for whatever came next, Zoax Theta realized the truth. The cosmos should fear humanity, but they should also be grateful for them, because when the next threat came from the darkness between stars, and something always came, humanity would be there. They would charge into battle with the same fury they had shown at New Singapore, the same determination they had displayed at Kepler. They would pay any price, bear any burden, make any sacrifice to protect not just their own species, but the entire galactic community they had chosen to defend. The cosmos feared them because they were dangerous, but they were dangerous in defense of life itself. They were the guardians the galaxy never knew it needed, forged in the fires of a death world and tempered by eons of struggle against extinction. They were humanity, and they would ensure the light never died. As the memorial service ended, and humans returned to their colonies to continue building and growing and preparing for whatever came next, ZYX Theta made a decision. He would continue serving alongside them, learning from them, trying to understand what drove them to such extremes. Because one day, the galaxy would face another threat. And when that day came, he wanted to be standing with the species that looked at impossible odds and chose to charge anyway. The species that turned stellar systems into weapons and themselves into legends. The species that the cosmos feared and that the cosmos could not survive without. Humanity had charged into war against the Devourers and emerged victorious. The price had been beyond calculation, but they had proven something to the watching universe. They could not be stopped. They could not be broken. They could only be delayed. And they would never, ever stop charging forward into whatever darkness dared threaten